Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Mara Roldi, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session of the Engaging with Evidence series on handing over the keys, outcome-based approaches to scaling impact through community-based organization. On the next slide, John, please. I'm welcoming you all as well to the Government Outcomes Lab that hosts this series of webinars. We are a research center and based at the University of Oxford at the Blavatsky School of Government. We've been working for the past 8 to 9 years now, focusing on how government can work productively through cross-sector partnership to improve social outcomes. So there is a recognition that government needs to work with other partners in the ecosystem to try to meet the needs of citizens and the planet as well. We, as a research center, hold high the value of research, of independent research. And this series of seminar is an example of how we really strive to create a platform for policymakers. On the next slide, John, please, to discuss what are the latest in terms of evidence, discuss what we learn from this evidence, distill the findings, and try to have a conversation on what does it mean for policymakers, researchers, and practitioners. The topic of today is locally led development in particular. Locally led development is the recognition that is necessary to involve local people and communities that are affected by development and humanitarian challenges when we design and implement solutions. This is not new. Since the Paris Declaration in 2005, there has been a lot of attention given to how do we give voice and we involve local people and community. And there have been also clear pledges. For instance, recently in 2021, USAID launched this new vision for global development, putting at the center the local-led development. Yet we do see a delay and a gap between these pledges and intention and the actual implementation of giving more power to local NGOs and giving more voice to local communities. In particular, research has indicated that only 6% of funding given by bilateral organizations to NGOs is going to NGOs that are registered in the Global South. And even philanthropic donations, research shows that about a quarter, less than a quarter, is going to local organization. So we hope that today's session, taking inspiration from the learning from Project Maitri that we will discuss, we will have a good chance to discuss what should change and how locally led development can have more space. I'll pause here before introducing our speaker for today, and I want to come to you as our audience. As you might have noticed, the session is recorded, so please be participative, engaged in the session. Use the chat as much as possible. I'm supported by John and Andrea on this session to make sure that we pick up all the interesting challenges and questions that you pose. There will be time to come to the question, clarification question halfway, and then we will have plenty of time to discuss with our panelists. But to start with, I would like to welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat. Can you say something about who you are, where are you joining us from? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, from wherever you're coming. And we would also like to know why you are particularly interested in this topic, so that maybe I can use some of your insight in challenging our speakers through the discussion. I'll give you a minute to say who you are in the chat. Yeah, wonderful to see people coming from various places in the world, the UK, India, Bihar Indian in particular, Milano. Welcome, Inelda. Nice to see you. Mumbai. Please keep adding, and please add. I welcome people who are suggesting what they want to gain from today's session. And with no further ado, because we have an absolutely packed session, let me introduce our speakers and panelists today. We have, in the first part of our discussion, an overview of the project that is given by Ajanti Bagwe from Educate Girl, who has been the lead on Project Maitri. We will have a perspective from Birendra Kumar, who is the General Secretary of Aid and Social Welfare Organization, who was one of the implementing partner of the project, and Chloe Edelstone, who led the write-up of the case study. The case study is being launched and published today, so it's available on the GoLab website, and you will receive it at the end of the day in your inbox as well, so that you can go in depth in the case studies. So these are our presenters for part one. I will then pause to ask a clarification question, and I will move in a panel discussion. And it's my pleasure to be welcoming Safina Hussain, who is the founder of Educate Girl, Jonathan NG, senior consultant from the USAID, Marcia Parada from LGT Venture Philanthropy Foundation, and Luis Tabel from Social Finance. So I'll pause here, and with no further ado, I think I'm handing over the microphone to Vaijanti.
Hello, everyone. Excited to see so many people joining us to hear from our learnings. So without wasting time, I'll start talking about who we are and what Project Maitri is all about. Next slide, please. So at Educate Girls, as the name suggests, we work for girls' education. There are 3 outcomes that we focus on: enrollment, retention, and improving the learning outcomes of marginalized girls in remote villages of India. The problem that we are trying to address is basically the gender gap in education and also the patriarchal mindsets which prevent girls from accessing their right to education. We want to have an India or have a world where all girls, there is behavioral, social, and economic transformation for all girls, and all children have access to quality education. At the core of our program is community mobilization. We want to build community ownership towards girls' education. So with this vision and mission, our founder, Safina Hussain, started this journey in 2007 with 50 schools in Pali district of Rajasthan. Now, after 17 years of our operational journey, we are currently working with almost 80,000 plus schools across 4 states of India: Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Bihar. So we started our intervention in Rajasthan in 2007, 2015 in Madhya Pradesh, 2019 in Uttar Pradesh, and 2022 in Bihar, where we are actually implementing Maitri program. During this journey, we have been successful in mobilizing communities to enroll more than 1.8 million girls back to schools and also improve learning outcomes for more than 2.2 million children across these states. Also, we implemented world's first development impact bond from 2015 to 2018 and overachieved our learning targets of 160%. Next slide, please. So let's understand, why did we start Maitri? Why did we think of scaling up programs through local partners? So as we had set a target for ourselves to enroll 1.56 million girls back to schools. And our machine learning data also showed that these girls were concentrated in 5% villages of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Bihar. We had a local delivery approach in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh through our teams and Team Balika. We were growing exponentially as an organization. We were already a team with more than 2,500 plus full-time employees, and it had its own challenges of managing day-to-day operations. So organic growth was not the solution. Secondly, we are an outcome-based focus organization. We focus on 3 outcomes: enrollment, retention, and learning. And we also had the experience of delivering development impact bond, which focus on outcome-based delivery. Third, and but not the least, we believe that community knows is well aware of its problem and can find the solution for the problem. My village, my problem, I am the solution is the slogan that our Team Balika carry on. And hence, we thought of engaging with small-scale community-based organizations who have a good rapport and engagement with the community. So to leverage this experience to build an ecosystem, a sustainable ecosystem for girls' education, that was the purpose behind starting Maitri. Next slide, please. So Maitri, it's a Hindi term. What it means is friendship. So in friendship, we don't have rules and strict guidelines, but we still rely on each other, right? So similarly, in Maitri, we have 3 partners who rely on each other. It's a very flexible model, but at the same time, our partners have the accountability to deliver the goals. Here are the 3 partners. The first partner is Educate Girls US, who plays the role of outcome-based donor. Then there are community-based organizations who are our implementing partners who implement the program on the ground. Then Educate Girls India team who provides a technical assistance to all our partners to achieve their goals. We also had 2 external evaluations. One external evaluator which was appointed by Educate Girls US and one additional external evaluation by one of our donors from Audacious Grant for 5 years to ensure the quality of data that we are receiving from the partners. Next slide, please. So we started Project Maitri in 2022 in September. We onboarded 7 community-based organizations in Bihar in September 2022. We added 10 new partners, 10 new community-based organizations in January 23. So we had a cohort of around 17 community-based organizations who worked with us from September 22 onwards. And we have been successful in enrolling more than 39,000 girls back to school. So what did each of the partners do in this journey? Educate Girls US played a very critical role of onboarding the consultant, identifying the partners, identifying the implementing partners or community-based organizations who fit into our criteria, doing the rigorous due diligence with them, onboarding with them, making agreements, contracting with them, and the entire financial management throughout the project. We had our community-based organizations who then recruited their teams, set up the project. We then started implementing the program on the ground. That is why they started identification of out-of-school girls by using our own Educate Girls mobile app to identify the out-of-school girls and then enrolling those girls using their own community mobilization model. That is why I say that this model is this partnership or this model is flexible because partners were using their own or they're leveraging their own community mobilization model. What matters to us was the outcome. We did not focus on inputs or outputs. The third partner, Educate Girls India team, played a critical role of handholding, mentoring, and coaching these partners to achieve their goals, supporting them to use our performance management system for data-driven and technology adoption, and supporting them for course correction wherever needed so that they achieve their goals. So it was a partnership or it was a joint effort between 3 partners to achieve the goal to ensure that no girl is left out of school. Next slide, please. So in this project, we had budget was made on the basis of per child cost and the payments were divided into 5 tranches. The first tranche, out of the 100% budget of the partners, the first tranche of 30% was paid immediately after we onboarded the partners, after the due diligence and signing of the agreement, which helped the partners to ensure they have the resources, capital to set up the project and also to recruit the team, get the team onboarded. The second tranche of 30% was paid when partners completed the first outcome of identifying out-of-school girls in their own communities. The third tranche was paid when partners completed 75% of the quality enrollments after doing a lot of community mobilization, other activities, but we also focus on that the data was quality, was adhering to the quality indicators that we have. So that was the third tranche, which was 25%. The fourth tranche was paid for retention. So we went back to the school, we and our partners went back to the school year after to see that the girls that we had enrolled last year still continue to be in the school. And at least 85% of them still continue to be in the school. And post that, the partners were paid 10% of the tranche. And the remaining 5% was the incentive if the partner overachieved their targets or they exceeded their targets. So this is how we have built our tranche system or the payment cycle for our partners. And this was discussed with the partners when we onboarded them. It was not easy to onboard to convince this kind of payment system or outcome-based program to the partners, but we took our partners on board right from the day one. We consulted them, we took their consent, and then we started this project. So we also have Birendra ji, who is the director of Eden, who has been one of our partners for last 2 years. So let's hear from our partners what has been their experience and their learnings.
Thank you, Vijayanti.
Hello everyone and namaskar. Our organization is with Project Maitri from its start, from cohort 1. I just wanted to add some points from implementing agency or NGO's perspective. Earlier, or you can say it most of the time, funding agency tends to formalize the whole roadmap at the starting of the project and don't provide any scope of course correction. For a change, in this project, there is an ample scope to reorganize your activities, strategies, and even manpower based on the existing needs. I can say that this project is not only a paradigm shift to our approach, but a great opportunity to learn how to be data and evidence driven. This learning has helped us to be more impactful and sustainable in long run. As an organization, it has also helped us to be more organized in our approach, more professional in our project management, more efficient in handling big data, and continuously using these to keep improving our system to optimize the outcome. Thank you. Kole?
Thank you, Virendra. Chloe, I think you led the write-up of the case study and you have some reflection to share.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'm going to very quickly talk a little bit about Social Finance International, but I really want to spend the bulk of the remaining time sharing what I think are some really exciting findings from this work. So for those of you who don't know us, Social Finance is a not-for-profit consultancy, and our goal is really to put outcomes at the heart of international development. And we do this by designing and implementing innovative finance initiatives, outcomes-based approaches, and cross-sector partnerships. We've watched Educate Girls lead the way in outcomes-based social impact ever since they launched the world's first ever development impact bond way back in 2015. And so it was both very exciting and almost not very surprising that they were the first organisation that we're aware of who's experimented with applying their experience of working in outcome-based approaches to scale their impact. So when the Educate Girls team asked us to kind of work with them to understand exactly what it was about this new way of working that was driving impact, we were really excited. I think one of our key hypotheses going into this work was that by focusing on outcomes rather than inputs, outcomes-based approaches might give community-based organisations the autonomy that they need to design interventions that are both culturally tailored to their community and can facilitate locally led programme delivery. And within that, it's really important to recognise that context matters and that service delivery needs to respond to ever-changing community needs and environments. We kind of had an inkling that outcomes-based approaches might be able to provide this flexibility whilst also ensuring accountability. And I'm really excited to share with you today a very clear case study in Project Maitri for exactly how this was done. So through a kind of review of key themes and documents and interviews with the Educate Girls teams, we've kind of mapped out the ingredients for the secret sauce at each stage of the project. And John, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide. And so what I'm going to do is spend the next 10 minutes or so talking you through key insights from these 4 stages before we'll open up to a panel. So on the next slide, I think it was very clear that part of the success of this programme is the incredibly strong foundations upon which it was built and the very careful process used to identify and select local community-based organisations such as IDENT, who you just heard from. At the pre-contracting stage, we really saw the value of an outcomes-based approach in that it created a very clear framework for success with measurable targets. As Vijayanti mentioned, the programme has 3 key objectives: to identify, to enrol, and to retain out-of-school girls. And in the initial engagements with community-based organisations, workshops were conducted to very clearly explain why this focus on school enrolment and to ensure both understanding and commitment from community-based organisations from the very beginning. And I think this alignment helped secure buy-in from partners at the stage where Project Maitri was quite a new concept, and then also build trust between community-based organizations and the Educate Girls team. I think the other point I want to highlight here is the need for a very iterative process in developing the selection criteria. So the Educate Girls team adjusted the criteria that was used to both select and identify community-based organizations between cohorts so that it could reflect the lessons and the successes from previous iterations. An example of this is after COVID-19 impacted the amount of funding that was received by these types of organizations, the annual revenue threshold for eligibility was then lowered. And it's this iterative process that meant that the selection of community-based organization was very closely adapted to the context of the program that was then delivered. Next slide, please. So in terms of contracting, and some of you will know this, but outcomes-based approaches relies very heavily on setting realistic targets that still incentivize impact. So Project Maitri uses a very interesting approach of both robust data sources to set targets, whilst also doing so in collaboration with community-based organizations. So what this looks like is that local partners propose their expected outcomes, what they think is achievable, and then these are then validated using the Educate Girls AI/ML tool. This co-definition of outcomes targets helps ensure very strong buy-in from community-based organizations, and also creates this kind of basis for impact accountability, and that there's a very clear and evidence-based framework that both parties have agreed and committed to. On the flip side, the contracting approach that was used here baked in a certain degree of flexibility, which meant that partners could adjust timelines and delivery if needed. And I think this flexibility is really what empowered community-based organizations to address challenges effectively, whilst also kind of leading to more improved outcomes and greater internal strategic adaptability. It also helped community-based organizations manage external factors. These things happen without being penalized. So things like school closures or unexpected staff resignation. And I think it's that flexibility whilst also creating alignment that's super interesting about the work that was done here. On the next slide, please. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we had this sort of inkling that outcomes-based approaches could have the potential to provide both flexibility whilst ensuring accountability. And I think speaking to community-based organizations like IDENT and also Educate Girls, it very quickly became apparent that this was indeed the case. Focusing contracts on outcomes rather than inputs and processes, in this example, gave community-based organizations the autonomy to design interventions that were culturally appropriate and tailored to their immediately local communities. This flexibility enabled community-based organizations to leverage their local expertise and respond to very specific socio-cultural challenges that were affecting out-of-school girls in their areas, and then adapt to obstacles that came up in delivery. So, for example, whereas in Rajasthan, door-to-door community engagement was a very effective tool for identifying girls, in Bihar, the community-based organizations found that community engagement through village meetings was perhaps more effective, or publishing lists of school-age girls in and out of school was a way of creating a community dialogue. And I think unlike more traditional input-based programs, community-based organizations were able to make these changes to delivery without having to adapt an activity plan or renegotiate grant agreements. All that really mattered here was that outcomes were achieved. I think another key ingredient to highlight here was the technical support that the Educate Girls teams provided. So as Vaijanti mentioned, Educate Girls provides organizations within the Project Maitri with very tailored support in monitoring and evaluation, delivery, data, and financial management. So as a result, Educate Girls were able to leverage their many, many years of program delivery experience and provide a very tailored support to organizations in the program based on really on what they needed. And throughout this process, the Educate Girls team saw that these organizations were able to make a transition from sort of more paper-based, monthly retroactive data collection to then using real-time data to drive decision-making and delivery. And this high contact, tailored support offered by the Educate Girls team also had an added benefit of kind of mitigating the risk of underperformance, in that it created a natural forum to problem solve for delivery issues together. Next slide, please, John. In terms of impact, so I think that, there's an emerging body of evidence around locally led development that indicates that it could potentially be more cost efficient than existing delivery models. And whilst we didn't conduct a sort of independent cost analysis, the data shared by Educate Girls shows that supporting the delivery of outcomes through local partners under Project Maitri can be more cost effective than direct delivery, even when, as is the case here, this direct delivery model has already been optimized. So for context, in the Educate Girls core program, which is largely directly delivered, the cost per out-of-school girl identified is around $48. In contrast, Project Maitri, which delivers priority outcomes through partnerships, achieves the same outcome for around $40 per out-of-school girl, which is around 16% more cost effective. I think more broadly, partnering with local community-based organizations has also enabled Educate Girls to scale its impact whilst also streamlining operations. I think in the sector, we very often talk about sort of scaling impactful solutions, but the reality is that scale is still quite elusive for a lot of us. I think often it's too expensive or too hard to expand beyond current delivery. And I think what's really exciting is that Educate Girls have basically taken this brave leap to share their expertise with others, to set that destination, and then to hand over the key. On the next slide, I'm just going to share sort of 3 kind of key opportunities for what this means for the future. And I'm sure that my panelists here will have others to add. But I think 3 points from my side. The first is that I think these findings offer up a really interesting blueprint for how larger NGOs could scale impact through partnerships without necessarily growing their operational footprint. However, important to note that scaling impact in this way not only requires a sort of strategic shift, but also a new way of working. So, the coaching role that Educate Girls played, it requires also developing more expertise in outcomes-based approaches and contracting. All of these were very new skills that the Educate Girls team developed as part of this process. And then finally, I think as we heard from Virendra earlier, outcomes-based partnerships can offer real opportunities for community-based organizations to access funding, but most importantly, to scale their own impact whilst leveraging their own local expertise. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to the GoLab team, but looking forward to answering some questions and to engaging with participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chloe and Virendra and Vayajanti, to having shared this case study. As I mentioned before, is available online, and there is a link in the chat. I want to pause now. So first of all, thank you for keeping to time. I know the case study was very, very rich, but our speaker have been very diligent, and I gave them strict timelines. Thank you for sticking to the time. I would like to pause for a few minutes in case there are any clarification questions on the case study before we move in a panel discussion, really getting into more the substance and what are the lessons learned and how we can use this lesson in other contexts. But if you have any clarification question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Okay, so I will start with a couple of questions that are in the chat at the moment. One is, what is quality enrollment? I don't know who wants to take this question, and we might start picking up Neville's question on the role of the performance manager and whether the fact that performance manager picked the implementer was helpful in creating collaboration. So who wants to take the quality? How was that defined? Vayajanti?
Yes. So we at Educate Girls, we are a data-driven organization. For every indicator that we have for data, we have defined some certain quality indicators. So when I say quality enrollments, it's all talk about is the age group. We are focusing on 7 to 14 years of girls, so 7 to 14 age group, and also the enrollment in that particular academic year. name of the child should match with the door-to-door survey data that we already conducted. So there's a list of indicators that we have, and we ensure that the data that we get for enrollment from partners, it matches those list of indicators. And that is what we call the quality enrollment.
Thank you, Vaijayanti. I wonder if I can call in Nevilin to articulate her question to make sure that is exactly we are answering exactly what you're interested in. Nevilin, can you unmute yourself?
Sure. Thanks. Hello, everybody, and hi, Chloe. Good to see you again. I think my question is about, I found it quite interesting that I think I got it right. You said the performance manager chose the implementer, which was quite different. And I'm just interested because we're trying to learn from our first example of how best to use the performance manager. And what we found was that although the performance manager was meant to support the implementer, it didn't really work very well because the implementer thought they knew everything and didn't really want to take support from the performance manager. So your guidance on that would be great. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so here what we did is like, because our partners were our community-based organizations or implementing partners, were implementing outcome-based approach for the first time. So they needed a support to understand how to do it. So we were the partners, we were together. From the beginning, we had said that this is our goal together. It's not any this thing that the partners have their own goal we are supporting. It's our goal. We together want to ensure that we achieve this goal. So that was the partnership from the beginning. And we supported them right from, because these are small scale organizations, we supported them right from the beginning in terms of developing their proposal, developing their budget at every stage. And I think our partners were open because they knew that this is something they're getting into, something new. They have not done it before. And as Birendraji already mentioned, this project from the beginning had a very big scope for course correction. There is a lot of flexibility. So partners, and this was for the first time they're seeing that the partner or the donor was not sticking into inputs, activities, those line items, everything. They were very flexible. So they actually, the partners also wanted to learn about it. I think that's what helped us, and the support and that kind of relationship that we build with the partners from the day one, that we are partners in this together. It's our goal. It's a shared goal that we have, is what helped us. And we actually handhold them in every step. Like initially, the partners were not even able to join the Zoom meeting. How to unmute themselves in the Zoom meeting. It is where we started with this partner. So, but that was a handholding support that we provided. And it actually helped. They realized that this handholding support, this coaching, mentoring is helping them to improvise their own systems, their own performance management. And that's how the partners were comfortable in getting this support from us.
Thank you. Thank you for the question and this explanation. I'll take another last clarification question from Amita. Amita, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, hello, can you see me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering in terms of the project in general. What kind of challenges were faced during implementation, and how did the partners come together and, you know, discuss these challenges, you know, maybe one example, a challenge, you know, and how were solutions found together?
So I will start, and maybe Birendraji can add from his own experience of being a partner with us. So we used to do these trainings for all our partners to get the master trainers training for our partners. And that was a platform where we brought all partners together. And there we also, we trained them on how to use our database application, how to do the survey and all of that. But we also used to do periodic check-ins with our partners, which also provided them the platform to learn from each other. I think the biggest challenge for these partners was this mindset shift from outputs to outcome-based approach, and also adapting the technology, because they were used to doing data collection, using paper pen, using this application, seeing the data using the application for data management, and this entire technology adoption and focus on quality of data was something that they found it challenging. But I think now they are quite comfortable to deal with it. But maybe Birendraji, if you want to add from your perspective.
but I will speak in Hindi and you can translate it in English.
Sure, sure.
अगर आप इम्प्लीमेंटिंग इसी के हिसाब से देखें तो 2 स्तर पे चैलेंज था। पहले हम लोग अपने प्रोसेस को करते थे बट आउटकम के लिए बहुत श्योर नहीं रहते थे और हमारा प्रोसेस ड्रिवन काम था, आउटकम ड्रिवन नहीं था। लेकिन अब जो इसमें चेंजेस हुआ है कि हमारा आउटकम पे डिपेंडेंट काम है, तो प्रोसेस को हम लोग इन बिटवीन कभी भी चेंज करते हैं अपने हिसाब से। तो एक ये सबसे बड़ा चीज हो गया। आप ट्रांसलेट करेंगे या मैं पूरा बोल?
Yes, yes. So the first point that Birendra is mentioning is about the process. I mean, initially, before getting into Maitri project, they were a process-driven organization. They never focused on the outcomes. But after getting into Maitri project, their focus was on outcomes, and they had the flexibility to change their process or realign their processes, realign their activities to achieve the outcomes.
अच्छा, दूसरा एक फायदा ये हुआ कि चूंकि मैत्री प्रोजेक्ट 20 डिस्ट्रिक्ट में काम कर रहा है, हर एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट के अलग अलग चैलेंजेस हैं, लेकिन इनका एक टाइमलाइन है जिसपे इनको फॉलो करना है। तो लोकल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, हम जैसे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन से ये फायदा हुआ कि मधुबनी में एक इलाका है मधेपुर, जहां पर कि अभी तक बाढ़ है, लेकिन चूंकि हमारे कैडर्स वहां पर अंदर तक हैं, तो हम लोग उस डेटा को और उस एडमिशन को क्वालिटी के रूप में करवा पा रहे हैं, जो कि दूसरे ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस के लिए दिक्कत हो।
So what he's saying that currently Maitri is present in almost 20 districts of BR, and there are different partners who are doing this program. So from his district in Madhubani, there is one area where it's always flooded. There's a lot of challenges when it comes to rainy season. But because of their own liaising with the government, local government, they're able to ensure that the girls get enrolled in the school, and also they are able to get the data. So I think it's this kind of interactions where this kind of liaising, because some of our partners ensure that they get good liaising with the government, they get the letter from the government for support in enrollment in school, which help them in getting these girls back to school. So this kind of sharing of learnings between the partners also help other partners to know, because documentation is one of the challenges. So they get to know how to deal with those challenges. I mean, just give one example of documentation as a challenge, but this interaction between partners help them to help each other and maybe find the solution for the challenges that they were not able to resolve.
Super. Thank you so much indeed. Very interesting. Dhanyavad.
Thank you very much. So I'll pause here. Thank you. If you have more questions about the case, as I said, it's available for you to read, and I'm sure you can reach out to Chloe and colleagues that are on the call today. I would like us to move a step further and moving in the panel discussion now, if I can have my panelists spotlighted. The purpose of this panel discussion is to move from the particular example that we've seen with the Project Maitri, and really think about what can we learn in terms of improving how we do locally led development. As I said at the start of our session, there is this desire and policy commitment to do more locally led development. We have massive challenges to meet, but we really need to rethink how development is being funded, and how do we put local organization front and center. So with our panelists, we are going to discuss what is the appetite of other stakeholders, other sector and geography to work in this way, if there is any, and what are the concern and the limitation they see in this approach. I'm starting out putting on under the spotlight two perspectives from funders. So funders, philanthropic organization, and bilaterals. I put you on the spot with Jonathan, who works from USAID, and Marcia from LGT Philanthropies. There are all these big commitments of doing more locally led development, and yet research shows that not enough of the funding, or not as much as desired, is flowing this way. So I would like to come to you, Jonathan, first, in terms of, I would like to hear the view from bilaterals and perhaps from government you work with on what are the barriers, why we don't have more funding, despite intention, flowing to locally led and community-based organization.
Great. Well, thank you, Mara, and thank you, everyone. As Mara said, my name is Jonathan Ung. I'm an attorney with USAID. I'm also a visiting fellow of practice with the Go Lab. I'm based in the U.S. Embassy in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And also just a standard caveat that I don't speak on behalf of USAID or the U.S. government for purposes of this panel discussion. So any of my opinions I expressed are purely my own, speaking in my personal capacity only. In response to the question, you're absolutely right. The data supports that here at USAID. Even, localization is a huge priority of our current administrator. Localization in other forms and other kind of renderings has been a huge priority of prior administrations as well. And so, why doesn't it happen more? Specifically in 2023, the amount of direct funding USAID gave as a percentage of its total programmatic budget fell down to 9.6% from 2022, which was 10.2%. So the data supports that assumption or that statement there. So why? In my view, I think it's basically as simple as both sides, funders and local organizations, just aren't ready for that yet in terms of direct funding kinds of relationships. It's as simple as that, but it doesn't mean that's easy, right? Simple does not mean easy. First, on the funder side, and I'm just representing a perspective and my own personal perspective, not all governments or bilaterals. But I do think that working within a large bureaucracy like a USAID, we not only have to understand, but appreciate the complexities of bureaucracy of how money gets out the door. And why is the status quo, i.e., relying on just a select few of large implementing partners, big contractors, typically based in the US or other developed countries. Why is the status quo so easy? Why is it so appealing? I think we need to really think through that a little bit more instead of just saying we need to change it overnight, because it won't happen overnight. The first reason is that there's just a lot of complexity in regulations and government funding. There's a higher level of scrutiny, public accountability. That just is what it is. You can continue to make some improvements, but the scrutiny won't go away. That comes with public funding, and therefore that comes with added complexity in our regulations. To be specific, on our standard grant terms and provisions, it's 97 pages. There are 33 mandatory provisions, and then there are 31 what we call required as applicable provisions. So that in itself, in our standard grant agreement, you're going to have then 97 more pages worth of potential terms and conditions, right? So that just kind of highlights how complex some of the regulations are. The second is there is a risk-averse culture, whether we like it or not, in government funding. Again, for the reasons I mentioned, it's public funding, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of accountability, et cetera. And then the third, these aren't exhaustive, but just to highlight a few, the third is there is limited staffing capacity in these large bureaucracies. You may think, wait, these are large organizations, well-funded. What do you mean? Well, there are also staffing limitations within large bureaucracies, and therefore it's easier to almost outsource a lot of the funding decisions and funding implementation to large contractors, large organizations that are already familiar with those bureaucratic regulations and the ins and outs. So I think pausing for a second and not only understanding, but appreciating why the status quo is so easy and so appealing. On the funder side, or on the local organization side, or the community-based organizations, the thing I would offer there too is why are we not ready to receive, why aren't local organizations necessarily ready to receive funding directly, save for some examples like Educate Girls 15, started with 17 CBOs down to eventually 15, it sounds like. So there are certainly examples, but as a whole, why are they not ready? That kind of makes sense in terms of, there's got to be first a minimum standard of operating excellence regardless. And if you're in a developing country as a local organization, it's hard to operate. Regardless of where you're receiving funding, how well are you able to hire your staff, design and implement your programs, keep track of accounting, reporting, auditing, regardless of where you get your funding. And then you add on the complexity of a large international donor funding on top of that. So It's not going to change if you just get funding from a large donor. First of all, is what is the minimum level of operational excellence for any local organization to operate? How big is that pool to even draw from? I think those are some just baseline starting points before we get into the platitudes of, yes, we need to fund more local organizations. The last thing I'll just mention, and then we can hear from my co-panelists, it's not just about direct funding. And so when we talk about localization or locally led development more specifically, think about what does it actually mean and why. It's not localization for localization's sake. It is because there is evidence to show that it improves our programming, it makes it more sustainable, and you're giving more voice to inclusive kind of development, right? It's supposed to be more effective, more efficient, in theory. So if we focus on those end goals, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to directly fund local organizations. That is a component, but not the only one. Another key component would be, how are you shifting the power dynamics such that local organizations are in meaningful roles to make meaningful decisions, whether or not they're receiving direct funding or not? So that's another piece. Again, not localization for localization's sake, but locally led development for the purpose of improving our programming.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. This was really rich, and thank you for your for being candid on the challenges on both sides. Marcia, coming from big philanthropy, what is your take? Why so difficult?
Thank you, Mar, and very happy to put in my 2 cents. So I think on the philanthropic level, it is happening, but certainly not to a large extent. And at LGTVP, we're if I can give the example of how we look at it, we're always looking to optimize for impact. So that means taking solutions that work, that are cost effective to as many people as possible. And our question internally has always been, what is the best way we can achieve this based, and also the role that philanthropy can play, given the resources that we have or that philanthropy has at hand. So our underlying belief is that supporting local organizations certainly are at the crux of this. Firstly, local organizations have the best insights into their own communities. These lead to innovation. They understand them better than anyone else. They have skin in the game. They have really an inherent interest that will be there for the long term. So the solutions will be there for a long term. And there's, of course, this actual physical proximity that increases trust, increases collaboration, et cetera. So at LGT Venture Philanthropy, what we've done is we provide philanthropic capital and also strategic support to these local organizations, but the organizations that normally have proven models, have evidence of impact, and are looking to build their capabilities further in order to increase that impact further. So we currently have 33 organizations in our portfolio in both India and Sub-Saharan Africa. And for all of these, we underwent a rigorous due diligence process. And this, of course, to ensure that they had a minimum or basic or good capabilities in place, always looking out that our funding has the most impact that it can have. And we then set up a plan to support, to build those additional gaps or fill in those additional gaps in terms of capabilities. So Educate Girls actually is one of these local organizations that we have in our portfolio. And most of them, similar to what Jonathan was mentioning, have reached a certain size. They have a strong level of operational excellence, strong systems, some strong processes. And I say all of this and give all of this background because even in the presence of a push for locally led development and supporting, again, hyperlocal and NGOs, the level of comfort and due diligence that philanthropy will undergo is unlikely to decrease dramatically. And I think this is because in my opinion at least, every responsible funder in philanthropy is accountable to someone, a board, a principal, to themselves, and they're accountable to the funds that they're deploying. And so they will be unlikely to support an organization just because they're local, but also because they're impactful. So that's, I think, a very important point that we want to make. And also we can get into the question just discussed later, how robust must this proof of impact be? And there's, of course, also some other points that Jonathan alluded to, the aspect of higher transaction costs for, say, managing 300 small organizations versus 330 larger organizations, which are a reality in a lot of private philanthropy, sometimes philanthropy that is foreign. So just let me pause there and hand over to my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Marcia. So big challenges. So it's not for no reason, but we are here to discuss, and I would like to come back to the challenges you pose and hear what we can do, both from you and our audience, to ameliorate these challenges. But I would like to shift the discussion a little bit now, and I would like to bring Safina in. In particular, I would like to focus on the interaction between the use of an outcome-based contract. This was an outcome-based contract that notoriously takes more time, and many point out, oh, there are so much transaction costs compared to a fee-for-service. What was the value of using this way of contracting when you're trying to be closer to the people and having locally led development? What is the interaction between this way of contracting and the ambition to have more impact through locally led development? And you led a very large NGOs, and so you have the perspective of what you could bring as a large NGOs when you did the first Educate Girl programs, and now working with smaller organizations. Can you share your learning?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I'd like to just kind of say, like, I think what we're discussing today is, it's kind of like, it's not an either or, like don't do input-based financing or don't do whatever. This is an and conversation, right? First and foremost, like here is yet another pathway that may be fit for purpose for certain outcomes or certain surroundings or for certain organizations, et cetera, right? So I think one is just to see it from that and perspective. Otherwise, a lot of the times we say, oh, we can't, this can't happen or that can't happen. This is yet another possibility. Now, what is it that the outcomes-based transactions are actually offering? I'm going to just break it down, right? One is they offer flexible capital. We have to remember, I know LGT is an amazing funder and they give unrestricted donors, but they're like gold dust in the ecosystem, right? Most of the money that, for example, like you would get from a CSR or, a corporate social responsibility in India for a hyperlocal partner would be tied to the line items of the budget. You said you will hire X number of people at this salary. You cannot deviate from that, right? So one is that the outcomes-based contract is actually offering Birendra and Aident and other very hyper-local organizations actually flexible capital, which is very hard for them to come by. And this is really, I mean, we know the value of unrestricted and flexible capital's worth. And so for a hyper-local NGO, it's even more valuable, right? So one is that. Secondly, it is offering a flexible sort of adaptive programming. So therefore, you have a lot of flexibility on the ground. Like Birendra was saying, right? Like they can course correct, they can shift things around if one strategy is not working. We are not prescribing, how it has to be done. They can actually think about the how in context of that, because it's very hard for me or you or most people in this room to really know what a tribal child out in Bihar might need in a very remote village, which is flooded most of the time, right? So therefore, we are not in a prescriptive role. They are in the front seat to decide what is the best way to reach their children. And so that kind of flexibility around adaptive programming. It's also not saying we will reach them this way and then halfway through you realize you need to make a change and you can't, which I think is really, again, important for locally based organizations who are facing an enormous amount of complexity in terms of delivery of what they do. Secondly, I think, all of this is then married very beautifully with transparency of outcomes or impact, right? Because at the end of the day, we want this flexible capital and this adaptive capacity to go towards actual results for our children. So there is also that marriage. So I think the outcome-based contracts are really valuable in that sense. Now, two things. I think one, you kind of mentioned like, oh, people say there's so many transaction costs to it. So actually, transaction costs, etc., come in the complexity of DIBs or SIBs or really complex instruments. Yeah, this is simplified into a grant. This is just an outcomes-based grant. So those transaction costs are not necessarily coming to play here. So this is very limited transaction cost. It would actually cost us more to put boots on the ground and do it organically versus having a really high, like a crack team led by Vejanti, who's done this work for 9 years. She's done this for 10 years within Educate Girls. She's a specialist, right? So kind of looking at that. And I think to the question of localization, everybody says it's a nice to have and everybody wants to do it. I think there is also a necessity for us to explore this. And the reason is that where AIDENT works or where most of our Maitri partners work are not just, they are the highest need areas. These are the most difficult areas. You are not going to find large NGOs there. You're not going to find anybody except for that hyper-local community-based organization. So if we want to accelerate SDGs, if we want to meet them on time, if we want to get to the highest need, if we want to get to that last child, we have to look at this approach seriously, because without that, it's not going to happen. So I don't think the locally led NGO is a nice to have in your funding portfolio just for the heck of it. It is important because it's going to help you get to the real problem areas fast. And like Vejanti was saying, out of school girls now are in 5% of the 40% of out of school girls in India are in 5% of the villages. These 5% of the villages where you have extreme poverty, where you have maybe all kinds of like flooding and very extreme situations. So it is also, we have to equate the locally led model also with the highest need. And therefore, I think if it is another instrument in your arsenal to look at outcomes-based approaches via like an NGO like Educate Girls, who's a specialist in this particular outcome, to then build the ecosystem, I think it's worth exploring and looking at. And I think that's what we did. And the results, and thanks to social finance, the case study, they sort of drew out all the insights, are really showing that, this adds acceleration, this adds speed, this gets us to that last child. It is an approach that is really of value, and adding that outcomes lens is what is actually de-risking in terms of impact, right? Otherwise, people don't believe your result, don't believe that this can happen. But AIDENT today can actually say, hey, listen, we have the evidence that this is working because we have clear external evaluations, we have the systems, and we have the capacity.
Thank you, Safina. It's nice to hear your perspective on the delivery side and supporting delivery. I wonder if I can bring Louise in at this point to reflect what is in it for government and funders that need to work with this delivery organization by using outcome-based contracting, an outcome-based grant with a locally led organization. What is of value and what are the difficulties, maybe?
Yeah, thanks, Mara. I guess I want to start by acknowledging that as Jonathan and Marcia have said, efforts are really being made by funders to shift more money and power to locally led organizations. I think what we're seeing, though, is that a lot of those efforts at the moment are through what we might think of as relatively incremental changes to business as usual. So we're seeing shifts in terms of making materials available in local languages, changes maybe to partner outreach approaches, reducing sometimes compliance requirements. But the focus is still very largely on NGOs, on locally led organizations who are good at keeping the receipts. And we've heard from Marcia and Jonathan in terms of why, in terms of there needing to be some accountability for how money is spent, and therefore needing to find organizations that can produce and report against robust activity plans and create confidence that money isn't being misspent. But I think when we look at this, our instinct is that this approach to identifying good locally led organizations isn't actually always helping us to understand which of those organizations are effective and cost effective at driving social change. So, in terms of shifting funding and the basis for funding towards more outcomes-based contracting, I think that does a few different things. It shifts accountability for funding to what really matters. So the accountability is still there, but the emphasis is shifting much more towards the social or environmental change that's being created. It creates a level of confidence that funders are paying for what works. So it mitigates the amount of funding at risk without impact accountability. And I think as Safina and Vajanti described today, the structure that Educate Girls used was really interesting balance between a funder taking effectively input-based risk or activity-based risk, providing cash flow to organizations to operate on the ground, whilst also ensuring that actually future funding, the longer term funding, was really tied to them delivering effectively. And then I think, and Safina, you spoke to this really compellingly just now, the operational flexibility that it creates for locally led organizations really makes the most of what they bring to the table in terms of their local knowledge, their understanding around how to deliver effectively for the communities that they serve, but also actually their ability to change that delivery as the context or the needs change. And absolutely it is our experience, as Safina mentioned, that these organizations are dealing not necessarily in hugely stable contexts, and therefore having that ability to shift operational delivery with a real focus on the change they want to achieve gives them a huge amount more scope to achieve impact than a very tightly defined activity-based contract would have. So I think there's a huge amount in it, potentially for government and philanthropic funders in thinking about how this kind of approach might work. And then just picking up, I guess, on Jonathan's point that big bureaucracies are hard to change. These practices are hard to change, and a lot of the processes are there for a reason. I think the other thing that the Educate Girls example really highlights is that larger NGOs may well have a role to play in supporting more funding to flow to locally based organizations, that actually there's an opportunity here to rethink how they are using their data systems, their finance systems, their reporting systems, such that they're not just looking upwards towards funders to demonstrate what they can do, they're actually repurposing those systems and processes and putting them in the service of locally led organizations. And I think the Project Maitri work really demonstrates what's possible when organizations really take that to heart.
Thank you, Louise. So we had, I think, a quite good overview of what are the potential. And thank you to Jonathan and Marcia at the beginning to say what are the challenges. I would like to push all our speakers to really reflect on, so what needs to change? So there is a recognition that the intention is there, the effort is there. And this is a case study that showed some insight and the lessons learned by Chloe and the initial speaker. So I'll come back to you, Jonathan. Like you articulated how difficult it is to work in a bureaucracy and what might be the limitation. Can you share your take or suggestion of what is the path that you would follow as a bilateral organization to do more of locally led development?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one specific proposed solution, but before I get into that, I also want to highlight the three key takeaways from this case study. The reason why that's successful is the devil's in the details, really. So just to highlight, Educate Girls is well positioned to scale impact with quality through outcomes-based partnerships. If you just take that, for example, there's a lot of assumptions to unpack. First, you have Educate Girls, which is a proven NGO that has implemented itself a proven intervention, maybe not in this part of India, but in other places. So you're already building off of what works from an organization that has a track record, right? Then in terms of the intervention, the outcomes definitions are well scoped and tested. So the key to any good outcomes-based design is threefold: defining the milestone well, pricing it, and then verifying it. And so that's been well kind of documented and then just adapted and applied. You're not learning it for the first time in some of these new approaches. So I think that's really key, and on through the other two kind of takeaways. So I think that's important. With that as well, I think we often overlook the individuals who execute the programs. Emphasizing the people matter at the end of the day. You can have all the best program design and approaches and intentions you want, but people matter, right? And it's not just organizations, it's the people, it's the talent at the end of the day. I don't think we emphasize that enough. So my specific proposal, I think in tandem with what I mentioned in terms of just coming to grips with the reality that I don't think we're ready yet. Both sides are making good progress. It's important to continue emphasizing localization as a top priority, no doubt. But we're not there yet. So how do we get there in the meantime? I think we need to re-envision what it means to be a prime contractor or a prime grantee, essentially an intermediary funder, so or organization. So if you have a large organization like a government donor, like a USAID, giving a grant or a contract to a recipient, a prime, let's say for the vernacular of our funding terms, that prime shouldn't be necessarily, or doesn't necessarily need to be the direct implementer of a program. Now, this is different than a prime with a bunch of subcontractors or sub-grantees. I'm talking about shifting the entire thinking as to what it means to be a smart intermediary that translates between the donor's needs and all its complex regulations and understanding its culture, and then understanding how to work with local organizations so that you're maximizing what they offer on the ground. And that may not necessarily mean that they have to have the latest and greatest accounting systems to appease the large donors. It's just that they need to be able to provide accountability, reporting, et cetera, that's sufficient for that intermediary organization. And then you funnel that up to the large donor organization. A good analogy would be what a fiscal sponsor does in the United States nonprofit context. A fiscal sponsor essentially is an existing US nonprofit with 501c, typically 501c3 tax exempt status, that provides legal and tax benefits to an unincorporated organization or an individual project. So donors can donate to that fiscal sponsor. That fiscal sponsor then manages the funds, provides fiduciary responsibility, financial oversight, and other capacity support for that unincorporated entity. And that fiscal sponsor provides kind of that comfort to the donors to say, hey, the ultimate recipient of your funds will be accountable to me, the fiscal sponsor, and I, as the fiscal sponsor, will be accountable to you, the donor. So if we can do more of that, I think in terms of the international development space, having good intermediaries who are managing locally led or local organizations, I think that is a good intermediary step, at least, or step right now, to be able to start bridging the realities of complex bureaucracies and local organizations that might not yet have full capacity to take on direct donor funding from large organizations.
Thank you, Jonathan, for this is very concrete recommendation. I took notes, and I hope also our audience. Marcia, venture philanthropy, LGT perspective, what do you think should shift and change?
Thank you, Mara. And I also agree quite a bit with Jonathan's perspective when looking at on the philanthropic side. And I think organizations, local organizations such as EG or other intermediaries do have a strong role to play in building the capacity again and furthering additional funds to these smaller hyperlocal NGOs. And I think it's about leveraging everybody's competitive advantage at the end of the day. And that's to maximize the impact in the most cost-effective way, and that it's sustainable. So it's not about what we mentioned earlier, funding these NGOs directly. It's about finding a way to build that capacity and getting that additional capital through. And in our portfolio, for example, we have in India funded many organizations that have developed partnership strategies, particularly to take their impact further through local organizations. And we've actually very much supported those strategies and the partnerships teams, because we see that there is very much benefit from leveraging the knowledge that these local communities have, leveraging the track record, the data, the systems, the approach that larger organizations have developed over the years. And they're also, in many cases, on the ground, right? They've closer to the communities. They're innovating their direct delivery much better than, for example, if we funders would take a stab at working very closely with these very small NGOs. And they've experimented with outcomes-based approaches, right? They have that know-how. So I think that there is very much there should be a push to support these larger organizations to be that intermediary, as Jonathan was mentioning. So I think I want to urge also many philanthropic funders to not shy away from these larger organizations, but just because they don't need us or they're too big for us, because they really play a very important role in developing this locally led ecosystem. So those would be my couple cents there.
Thank you, Marcia. Safina, I'll ask a similar question to you. Like, you are a large NGOs by many standards. Can you take on this role? Is that what needs to change? Do you have other changes to put forward?
Yeah, no, I just have to say, I think Marcia and Jonathan, like, Mara, if you're taking notes, please do share them with me, because they were just like so great on the points. I was like, oh my God, I'm not fast enough to write them all down, but absolutely brilliant. I think we have to think again, like, what are our bottlenecks? I think at the panel, you said, scale is elusive. Not every organization that you've invested in is going to scale. There are a handful of organizations today that are even outcomes based, right? I mean, we are an unusual suspect that because of the dip, that for a decade we have been delivering to outcomes. Delivery to outcomes is in our DNA, right? And we have been delivering to the same outcome. Our heart beats for the out-of-school girl, and we do everything for the out-of-school girl. So we're also like an outcome specialist in that sense, right? We can predict where the highest concentrations are using AI and machine learning. We can do blah, blah, blah. And we have 2 RCTs and gazillion evidence-based studies to say, what works, et cetera, et cetera. So given that we are we're not meeting the SDGs, we're not meeting our children and giving them what we need to, it's hard to scale. It's hard to be outcomes driven. Educate Girls has actually grown because of donors' investment in it over the past 17 years, right? I mean, LGTVP has been a long-time donor. They've actually already invested in building our tech capacity and our people capacity, our leadership capacity, in our evidence, all of that. There's a lot of investment that has gone in. So I almost see this as, it's like, how do they say? If I'm saying it wrong, please correct me. But they say, how do you sweat your infrastructure, in a sense, right? I hope I said it correctly. So now you have made an investment and created these organizations such as Educate Girls, who are now outcome specialists. They know how to scale. They know how to deliver outcomes, right? How do you leverage this that you have funded and created over a period of time to actually then accelerate and build an ecosystem of other organizations that may not necessarily scale, but can still deliver impact at an accelerated trajectory in the highest need areas. So again, all of these organizations don't have to develop their tech platforms. They don't have to develop an app because you've already invested in one, right? And they can leverage and kind of move the story faster And like I said, so again, there's a lot of leverage built into thinking about this. And again, so if we were to see organizations such as Educate Girls and this kind of a template for accelerating impact, then you could look at big bets or large, collaboratives, sort of using organizations like Educate Girls to set up outcome funds that can then go very quickly into the hands of small, locally based NGOs. So, because if we do it ourselves, it'll take us 30 months. If we do it through partners, it'll take us 9 months, right? I mean, it's like a no-brainer. So again, it becomes, like I said, a tool in our arsenal, for us to kind of. So I think if donors are willing to take a chance, because we have a lot of evidence, we have a lot of expertise, and with Maitri, is to maybe test out an outcomes fund or a sort of a collaborative instrument, but not only looking at intermediaries as in consultants or whatever, but to also look at outcome specialists like us.
Thank you, Safina. I'll bring in for a final reflection like Louise, but I already mentioned you a question I'm going to ask you so you can think about an answer. Like you said, like organization like Educate Girls, if you have to do a job spec, like what do these organizations look like? If I was a bilateral government or a fund, or like other type of funder, and I'm looking for an organization that performs that function, what does the job spec would look like? And I'll come back to you in a second. I want to bring Louise in as well for your reflection about what should change, and then I'll pause for Q&A with the audience.
Thanks, Mara. Yes, I mean, I think I would echo what other panelists have said, which is, there is, I think, a really interesting role for larger and international NGOs to repurpose their infrastructure that they already have, their knowledge that they already have, to identify high potential locally led organizations, to provide access to data and finance systems that allow for adaptive delivery to maximize outcomes, and to shift, I think, a mindset as well. There's a cultural shift here too, I think, around shifting from managing project delivery to coaching and supporting partners to deliver better outcomes. Because as Safina and others have said, we don't actually know what's really going to move the needle for instance, an out-of-school girl in a tribal area of Bihar. We need to rely on the local contextual knowledge that some of these more local partners would have. So I think that's really important. There's definitely a role to repurpose that infrastructure. I think there is something interesting about what role outcomes-based approaches might play. As Safina said, there's the Project Maitri, I think, illustrates what that could look like when it's smart grant making, when you really bring that simplicity to how those contracts can operate, and when you don't let the best be the enemy of the good. So you think pragmatically about what should the metrics be, not having a massive RCT to test for success and whether impact has been achieved, but instead saying, what data will be collected anyway? In this case, maybe on a school registration roll or another list at the community level, and how can we leverage that data rather than setting a huge evaluation infrastructure around the edges? So there's a simplicity here. And I think, I would also agree, our sense and social finance has worked with these kinds of structures for over 15 years now. But our instinct is this could have real potential in other sectors, other geographies. And we know that there are other organizations who are really keen to test this approach to working. Village Enterprise is really looking at this around poverty graduation through community-based partners in Rwanda at the moment. We're talking to a couple of international NGOs who are looking at this kind of approach around anticipatory action or early childhood education. And I think that will be really important for us as a sector to learn and share what works. Where are the guidelines to do this quickly and easily, keeping transaction costs low or keeping accountability high? And then thinking about, well, how does practice need to shift? Within funders, within larger NGOs, and within community-based organizations to really unlock the potential of working in this way.
Thank you, Louise. I find this very encouraging as a development. I'll pause a second because I want to give some time to the audience to pose questions. Many of the questions have been answered as we were having a discussion, but I see one that hasn't been tackled yet, which is Claire, England. Claire, I don't know if you are still connected. If you are, you're welcome to unmute and ask your question directly.
Yeah, my question was just around sort of using market-based solutions, because I think as Safina had kind of mentioned, that the pool of sort of not-for-profit local NGOs might not be massive, and there are a lot of social entrepreneurs that are existing in low-income and lower middle-income countries that get often overlooked as change makers. And I just wondered, kind of in terms of what philanthropy's role can be in kind of catalyzing these sort of social entrepreneurs.
Marcia and Louise, I can see you are ready to answer.
Just very quickly, my 2 cents on that. I think development needs both non-market-based and market-based solutions. I think the problem is just the challenge is very large, and there's different target groups, different models that can actually tackle the issue as well. So I don't think we necessarily favor non-market-based solutions over market-based solutions, but they have to be adapted to the current environment, to the current target group. And that's normally how we select what type of organization we back.
You have a quick add-on, Louise?
Yes, just really around thinking about how this kind of outcomes-based approach can top up user-paid models, which is that this is something we explore quite a lot. We were part of supporting a social enterprise in Kenya, Water4, to launch a model like this earlier this year, for instance. And I think there's real potential whereby small amounts of philanthropic or donor money can unlock really big change, where actually those outcomes-based top-ups are used to support populations who couldn't afford to pay full price for the service to access those services, but it's just a top-up to what they can afford to pay, or where actually there are regions geographically that wouldn't be served if it weren't for some kind of offset to the costs of serving those more remote areas, or areas where populations are less dense. And therefore, actually, we think this could be a really efficient model. And absolutely, there's a space for them alongside more conventional grant-funded intervention.
Thank you, Louise. So, Safina, I'll come to you with this job description of what are those organizations. It seems that that there is a potential shift in the ecosystem, and then I'll just go around our panelists for one soundbite takeaway for our audience, because I'm mindful of time. There has been a really rich discussion. And what would you recommend to people who come across this project as this is the key learning and key takeaway? So, Safina, the job description, what is this organization? What does it look like? The must-have.
Mara, this is an out of syllabus question, but let me take. I think just I mean, obviously the organization needs to have an outcome focus themselves. They should have delivered to outcomes before they can bring other partners on to sort of help them do it. And like I said, they actually will end up being, like you said, village enterprise. They will end up being outcome specialists in some shape or form. So Educate Girls shouldn't be running an outcome fund for like health indicators or whatever. It's leveraging whatever. So they are in some shape or form a specialist. They have an outcomes lens and experience. So in their DNA, they obviously should have operated at some level of scale, evidence, external, robust, rigorous evidence. Yeah, but I think those are just like the sort of the checklist stuff. But I think there are other aspects which I think are really critical, because you don't want a vendor relationship. Maitri means friendship, right? So what it means is, I think the mindset of that organization needs to be that we are only as strong as our ecosystem. And I think it's really important. And I'll give you an example. When when we became the first TED Audacious project from Asia. Like, it was a big deal for Educate Girls. The first thing we did coming back to India was we ran a workshop for 40 local organizations and saying, how can we help you to be the next audacious winner? So I think at some level, you would want them to have that in their mindset and in their heart and their culture, is to be ecosystem builders, because these are not transactional things. These are, again, about partnerships and about this thing, right? And so a lot of empathy, high EQ and high empathy. So I know we have contracts, we have an exit criteria, but I'll tell you, the only time we exit partners outright is when there are integrity issues. However, if it's poor performance issues, the empathy first kicks in. It is first all about, how can we support you? How can we support you? How can we support you? How can we help you get to the root cause? Who can we send over there? Can we retrain? Can we do course correction? If you didn't find out of school girls, how can we bring, to support you? So I think that mindset is I would say, a larger part of that job description, because this is not a mechanical sort of a piece. So that's what I would say.
Thank
but
you.
Thank you for that question. That was really good.
So I'm going for a quick round of a soundbite. A soundbite is a 30-second key takeaway for our audience. I'll go Louise, Marcia, Jonathan, and Safina. Louise. Oh, yeah, Louise.
Thank you. So we called this webinar Handing Over the Keys, and I hope that's really come through today, the potential that can happen when objectives are set, but where there's a lot of control and power that's handed over to community-based organizations. So I guess my takeaway from this is that shifting accountability for funds towards impact could unlock the potential of locally led development and move power and money closer to communities in a really sustainable way that builds their capacity for the long term.
Thank you, Louise. Marcia.
Thank you, Mara. I'd say, just to reemphasize the point, that every stakeholder or partner has a role to play in this ecosystem of locally led development. There's the funder side, there's the intermediaries or large local organizations that have that outcomes-based approach that can build that capacity. There's the hyperlocal NGOs or CBOs that have that community knowledge, insights, skin in the game. And we all have to work together to be able to get to this locally led development.
Thank you, Marcia. Jonathan.
On the relationship piece with local organizations, I think moving from just a transactional approach to more of a relational approach is going to be key, meaning less about obligations and more about responsibilities, less about rights and more about privileges. On the outcomes-based approaches, to kind of borrow from what Louise said earlier, don't make perfect be the enemy of the good. Perhaps even one step below that, don't let sufficient be the enemy of good, because it's a process to get good outcomes in place, and that could even mean just good outputs as proxies for the outcomes you want to achieve. So start simple, start easy to the extent that's possible, and then try to do more complex stuff later.
Thank you, Safina. Your soundbite.
Yeah, that I think, oh my God, these are the hardest thing. The soundbite for me was really, I think, yes, it's exciting. We have another tool in our arsenal, and I think it bears investing in and exploring more, because it is a perfect marriage of accountability, flexibility, and locally led organizations.
Thank you, Safina. As a research institution, we look forward to see more projects and bringing them here and learn. I'll stop here in the interest of time. We are at time. I want to thank our panelists and our speaker, Vayajanti, Birendra, and Chloe, who introduced the case study at the beginning, and you for this active participation. I want to remind you that if you enjoyed engaging with evidence session, the next session, there is a session in India next week on the skill impact bond. And the week after, we have another one, always on employment, with the mental health and employment partnership in the UK, the first week of December. So please register to the newsletter to receive information on this session. And thank you again, everyone, for such a rich conversation and discussion. Bye for now.